Kia ora. Welcome back to Raw Politics, Newsroom's weekly podcast and video discussion on the issues that are intriguing us right now. We have 24 weeks left until the general election on October 14, so lots to talk about. This week, I'm joined again by Jo Moir, our political editor, and Sam Sachdeva, our national affairs editor, who are sitting in a very small-looking cupboard of a studio down in Parliament. Welcome, guys.
Hello.
Thank you for having us.
This week, Raw Politics turns our attention to the Green Party's odd internal bust-up as it prepares for what should be a high-potential election for them on issues climate. We also move and look at Chris Hipkins as our Ambassador-in-Chief, our statesman, how he went over in Australia. Then we'll have a viewer question and come back to our recommendations for you for this weekend, things we've watched and read that we think are worth your time. First up this week, the Greens. We've had a lot of leaks and emissions out of that caucus, which is, Sam, I think highly ungreen, unharmonious, unrestorative justice, unpeaceful and pretty much uncool. What can you tell us about what's been going on there?
Yeah, they might need to bring the Morris dancing back to maybe that would restore peace and unity in the caucus. So this all goes back to, I can't remember exactly when it was, a few weeks ago now, Elizabeth Kirikiri's unfortunate group chat message that went to the wrong group. I mean, we've all been there. It's pretty relatable, but it's slightly higher stakes when you're in a small caucus, sort of having a shot at Chloe Swarbrick and bemoaning the fact that her members' bill was advancing through the House. Yeah, James Shaw and Marama Davidson announced that they would be undertaking an inquiry into that. And while that's theoretically happening behind closed doors, it's all playing out very openly and unsavourily in public. You've had I think sources going to Radio New Zealand and saying that Elizabeth Kirikiri has a history of bullying behaviour towards her colleagues and staff. Then you've had counter stories from her supporters saying that actually this is wrong. It's about race. She's being maligned unfairly. And then you've had a retaliation in turn from Dr. Kirikiri's supporters her critics, saying that actually, no, she is a targeted Māori staff and colleagues as well. So you're right, it's just very messy, and the fact that it's all playing out so openly as well. This is, you always have these agitations in caucus, right? But normally they spill out behind closed doors and not, in briefing to the media after briefing to the media.
Didn't she come to Parliament with a high reputation and a lot of praise internally from the Greens for representing communities so well and being an inclusive and kind of high representative of lots of perhaps the minority areas of their support?
Yeah, no, she did, Tim. And I mean, you've seen that kind of play out in the fact that she has got such a high initial list ranking. Obviously, the Green Party has two stages around its list rankings. And actually on Friday, they're going to begin voting. The party is going to begin voting on that sort of final list, which is interesting timing when all of this is still playing out the way that it is. But, you had Elizabeth Kirikiri, who is very much a new MP, who came in at number 4 on the list, if I recall correctly. You had Marama Davidson, James Shaw, Chloe Swarbrick, and then Elizabeth Kirikiri. So, she is highly regarded. She is involved in many communities, as you pointed out there. So, very interesting to have so many sort of allegations and attacks against her now for being what has been described as a mean girl. And, it's just kind of having a crack at kind of everyone in the caucus, it seems. Some of those other comments that were made to RNZ by these anonymous sources were that, she shuts down her MP colleagues in group discussions. She says that, she's the authority when it comes to Māori and Pacifica issues. And if anyone else sort of tries to say that, they have an opinion or perhaps we should do it differently, that gets her back up. And I guess the one thing I would say, though, is that we're only getting one side of things. We haven't had anything from Elizabeth Kirikiri, who's not in a position to provide comment because she's simply not allowed to while this investigation is going on. The MPs have been told that they are not allowed to speak. And so these anonymous sources we're hearing from are people sort of within the party, staffers probably, all very anonymous though. And so, a very sort of one-sided account at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see what that report does reveal if it actually comes out anytime soon. At the time that the investigation was announced, I asked James Shaw whether it would be weeks, months, months or years. He said not months or years, but we're already well into 3 weeks. So we're getting close to months.
So, Jo, are we seriously suggesting, or are they seriously suggesting, that they could have their list out and finalised within a few days, but this inquiry won't be known, what they've found and how it's been resolved?
Yeah, no, that is seriously a possible outcome here. I mean, these two things have been run very separately, and my understanding from the Greens is that, the party list process goes ahead as planned, and obviously the investigation will take as long as it takes. That's been led by their chief whip. They don't call it that. What is it? Musterer. Jan Logie and their chief of staff, Robin Campbell, are doing this investigation. And I mean, on paper, you kind of go, well, how long does it take to kind of, have a look through some messages and have a chat to all of the MPs? And, it's been a 3-week recess. You would have thought that they've had time to kind of do that. But perhaps they've found lots of things. Perhaps there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we're going to find out about.
I mean, to me, I just question why you would go ahead with this inquiry in the first place. It would have been easy enough to say, look, we're disappointed in this. We're going to be dealing with it internally, and that's the end of the matter. But now it drags out. It's very unsavoury, and you're going to end up with difficult conclusions to draw. I mean, if they find that she has been sending similarly snarky or unbecoming messages about Chloe in private groups, is that something you should discipline an MP for? I mean, people complain about their co-workers all the time. Not me, of course. I love you both very dearly, but
I'm sure that's entirely accurate. But, yeah.
I just don't know where you draw the line. So it kind of gets into these grey areas, and it seems like they've created more of a problem for themselves than perhaps they needed to.
So wider, here's this party. Labor's been ditching climate emissions policies left, right and centre, leaving ground and openings, you'd think, for the Greens to come together and say, right, there's some real potential in 24 weeks. This kind of division, how does it affect them presenting themselves? And second, how do both James Shaw and Marama Davidson split or fit into their view on these things? Do we think one or other of them back Elizabeth and one or other of them back Chloe?
Well, I think on that point, on the James and Marama, I think that they are both supportive of Chloe. I don't think that either of them are throwing their weight and support behind Elizabeth Kerekere. What she did is very ungreen, and I don't think either of them think that, that's, it's a distraction. So as leaders, they'll be looking at it going, well, this is really annoying, Elizabeth Kerekere, thanks a lot for that. But, my understanding at least is that Elizabeth's behaviour in the caucus has been a problem for some time, and both James and Marama are aware of that. So, they would see it as an opportunity perhaps to deal with what is probably a reasonably long-standing issue. In terms of your other point, the Green Party is now starting to look a little bit like, National a year or so ago. And, it's sort of fraying at the seams, and you've got sort of infighting and sort of backstabbing. And I mean, I'm not by any means saying that this is something that's going on, and everyone's in amongst it. I think you've got a couple of players here. But, this is exactly the sort of stuff that you don't need, particularly, 24 weeks out from an election. And that's really problematic, because you have got a situation where Chris Hipkins has come in and is deliberately moving the Labour Party more into that centre space and fighting National. And as you said, Tim, high potential here for the Greens. This is a big space for them to be able to really crack on and, really get into the inequality issues, the climate issues, the environment issues. Even take the fact that you've now had Inland Revenue come out with this tax report indicating how unfair the tax system is, and that, the wealthy are paying half the tax of what ordinary Kiwis are. I mean, that speaks exactly to a lot of the points that the Green Party is trying to make. So here they've got all of this, evidence and material and space, finally, because they didn't have that under Jacinda Ardern, to crack on. And instead, you've got this kind of nonsense crybaby mean girl investigation going on and sucking up all your oxygen.
She sounds like a very unlikely Dominic Raab, who's just stood down for bullying and hitting out at others over in the UK. Turning now to Chris Hipkins and his role as chief statesman for New Zealand, having just returned from a lightning trip to Brisbane. Jo, you were with him there as he went across to meet Anthony Albanese ahead of Anzac Day and talk a whole range of things, including AUKUS. What I'm interested in is how a domestic politician, a new guy, a couple of months into the job, how he carried himself, how you think he was received, and basically how he shaped up as a diplomat.
Yeah, no, it was an interesting trip with Chris Hipkins. It was the first one I had done with him abroad. Sam, you went with him the only other international trip he's done, which was a one-dayer to Canberra. And I think you spoke about his inexperience in the piece that you wrote, sort of wrapping up that trip. And, I think there is an element of that. But it was interesting too, just seeing him at sort of the different meetings and events that took place over those 2 days. The sort of guts of the trip was around the closer economic relationship 40th anniversary. And so you had this big dinner on the Saturday night where you had lots of sort of Queensland and federal government representation, minus Anthony Albanese, who apparently was meant to be there, but for whatever reason ended up flying into Brisbane on the Sunday instead. And you had this sort of, I think they called it a fireside chat. There was no fire, but they spoke with, the MC there spoke with both Chris Hipkins and also the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, and that was quite interesting. Chalmers is a massive fan of Grant Robertson. They have a very close relationship, and he talked about Grant Robertson several times, which I thought was sort of slightly awkward when you think about the fact that a lot of people thought Grant Robertson was going to be the Prime Minister. So that was interesting, and he was quite sort of animated and quite lively and sort of funny, and the questions, he sort of really took them and sort of explained at great length the relationship and why it was important. I don't know whether, Chris Hipkins said that he had been a little bit sick earlier in the week, and I don't know whether just sort of a lot what had been going on and tired, but he wasn't kind of full of life in that and sort of got overtaken by Chalmers was kind of the takeaway from that dinner. And then, you went to the next day where he was side by side with Anthony Albanese at the joint press conference where, they would have been answering questions about the citizenship announcement that was such old news by then because it had been announced before Chris Hipkins had even got on the plane to go to Brisbane. And so instead it was lots of more like geopolitical type questions, things like AUKUS, China, etc. But all of the questions were directed at Anthony Albanese. I think Chris Hipkins got one question, bearing in mind that this is 3 questions for New Zealand media and 3 questions for Australian media. 5 of those 6 questions went to Anthony Albanese, at least in the first instance, before sort of saying, "Oh, and what about you, Chris Hipkins?" So, when you put them on a stage together, I think, certainly from the Australian media side, it was their own Prime Minister they were wanting to hear from. So that was interesting. Talking to Chris Hipkins on the way back, he said that he has a really good relationship with Anthony Albanese, and I think you saw that when they were kind of walking around at the community barbecue. Of course, they got that photo of them both eating the gigantic sausage. And, they were having laughs, and it was pretty natural apart from when they were talking about sport, which, of course, Australian and New Zealand Prime Ministers always do. And I don't think Albo or Chippy are actually particularly clued up when it comes to sports. So that was
come on now, Joe. I'm sure Chippy loves watching the Hurricanes at the Cosy Club when he goes for his spates to have a chat about bread and butter issues with the local patrons. There you go. I've got that one in for the podcast.
Sure.
Yeah, you're right.
One quick thing, Jo. What was the point of that photograph session with the sausages and hot dogs? What the hell was that all about?
I think that was another exercise in Chris Hipkins distinguishing himself from Jacinda Ardern, who was never photographed near food, let alone eating it.
And I think there's a good reason why. He looked vaguely deranged, our Prime Minister, sort of unhinging his jaw to tuck into that. It's tough. And I don't want to food shame him, let me be clear. I don't want to food shame any politician. They should feel free to eat. But I understand why some of them don't, because it's impossible to look elegant while you're eating, let alone while you're eating a hot dog.
Sam, they all go into this brand new. They're all kind of inexperienced first time or first couple of times on the international stage. How hard is it for them? You've watched a lot of them start out there and try to sort of get on with the bigger players and make their name. How hard is it? Who advises them and how best to play it for them?
Look, I think it can be very difficult, to be honest. You've got these sort of diplomatic subtleties in terms of, for example, and I know politicians trip over this a lot, do you call Taiwan a country or an economy? And you make that mistake and all of a sudden someone in China notices and you have it blown up onto the front page. So, look, there are a lot of intricacies there. Chris Hipkins has been somewhat honest, I think, when he went to Canberra for his first trip. He said, look, I don't have a lot of foreign policy experience. He talked about the fact that, as the Education Ministry worked on attracting international students to New Zealand, but I don't think that really counts. I don't think you can say that sort of firms up your diplomatic bona fides. So, look, he'll be getting lots of briefings from people at MFAT. There'll be someone seconded into the Prime Minister's office or DPMC at the least who helps with these details. He'll be getting a lot of information coming across his desk, but it's just you're by nature less comfortable, I think, when you're talking about matters outside your own country. It takes a bit of work. So he still doesn't quite seem fully comfortable in that space. He kind of has struggled a little bit when he's been asked about things like AUKUS, about the relationship with China, the relationship with the United States. His default line is that New Zealand's foreign policy has not changed. It's sort of like, well, that's fine, but what is our foreign policy? Can you please explain it? So a little bit of work to do, but particularly in an election year, it's not going to be at the forefront of a lot of people's minds. So he's got a bit of leeway in that space to kind of get up to speed.
So, Tim, I'm interested, and not to sort of show your age here or anything, although, feel free to tell us what it was like to travel with Richard Seddon. But, what is your take on Chris Hipkins on the international stage?
Well, Jo, you do feel your age when you look at a Prime Minister so young looking as him. It's like when you grow older than the police constables and teachers and principals and things. Look, I think he's obviously a smart guy. He's a quick study. That's obviously in his advantage. I do think it's difficult for people who are thrust into things when there's an election nearby to kind of focus properly on what they need to be doing, as Sam's just been saying externally. He will be fine if he gets the chance to spread his wings on that, but he won't get a lot, will he? I know you guys have written about him making choices about where he's going to go. Does he go? He's going to go to NATO and somewhere else, Jo? Where was the other one he's got on his...
Well, it's a 50-50 at the moment as to whether this sort of week-long trade delegation goes to China, but he is heading off
China,
this week coming to the King's coronation, and he has a bunch of meetings in the UK around that as well.
Yeah. So, put that one aside. That's just sort of ceremonial more than anything else, isn't it? But the NATO one's a big one, and then he's got to decide on China. I think his mind will be elsewhere. He'll be pitching forward as to how he turns things around here. And that's the ultimate for them. That's the urgent and the vital. And it's hard for someone in an election year to go into this scene, I think. So, I think he'll do fine. Our reader question this week from a newsroom reader wondering what the Maori Party is up to Pāti Māori. Why are they looking possibly at celebrity candidates? What's the upside for them? Sam?
Yeah, it's fascinating. We've had this report, I think, from an Open Democracy reporter at Stuff initially, or as part of the Public Interest Journalism Fund, that they may have former Labour MP Louisa Wall running in her former Manurewa electorate. The nature of her losing that for Labour, getting deselected, was quite contentious. And then Dave Letele, the formerly the Brown Butterbean, I think, former boxer turned fitness advocate and charity worker, has done a lot of fantastic work around Auckland. So, it shows that they've kind of got aspirations beyond winning the electorate seats, the ones that Rawiri Waititi has held on to that. Maybe Debbie Ngarewa-Pack has a chance, but they're sort of saying, I think, look, if we can grow our vote, if we can get more than, the electorate MPs in, then that would be great. And look, it's interesting because it becomes sort of reinforcing. If you've got these big names who can drive up the vote in the electorates where they're running, then maybe that does give them a great chance. I don't know that I could see Louisa winning her electorate, and I don't know about Dave Letele, but at the very least, the more profile, the better. So it's for them. So it's going to be quite fascinating.
So it's a matter of a few thousand extra votes for the party vote, basically.
Yeah, this is the nature of MMP, is if you've got an electorate seat, the difference between, like 1.2% of vote in 1.5 or 1.6, that does bring in an extra MP. So you can do quite a lot around the margins. I'm sure they'll say they're aspirational for more than that, but it really only takes, a few thousand votes, or probably a few tens of thousands of votes to move things in your favour.
Well, it's interesting too when you think about the fact that the National Party is, for the first time in a very long time, running into Māori electorates this year. So you've got them in Tamaki Makaurau and Te Taihoru, where you've got former Whanganui MP Hariti Hipango is running there. She's won the selection the other week. So, you've suddenly got, I guess, sort of both sides of the spectrum looking and going, well, where can we sort of show ourselves and where can we perhaps pick up some additional votes? I think it's a good strategy. I mean, I think it's good that the National Party is looking at those Māori electorates again, and equally I think it's good that Te Pāti Māori is broadening out into the general electorates too. I mean, I have young female Pākehā friends who say to me that politically they align closely with Te Pāti Māori. So, to have them in general electorates like that, I think is really positive.
Okay, we come to the time for our recommendations for the week, what we've read or seen or heard. Mine is a fabulous Sky TV interview following Dominic Raab's removal for allegations of bullying in the UK from both Deputy Prime Minister and his ministerial roles. The interview was on Sky TV with the former permanent head of the Foreign Office, who puts things back in perspective about what it was like and what really, how insulting perhaps Raab's comments about the civil service are. But there's one scene that I think I recommend for everybody. It's when the Sky TV interviewer asks him, did you like working for Dominic Raab? And it's a classic of a yes, Prime Minister Mandarin's attempt to not answer, but to give every answer at once. Sam, what do you recommend?
Well, I enjoyed very much a piece from an esteemed former colleague, Henry Cook, now applying his trade in the United Kingdom. He did a piece for The Guardian on the citizenship announcement and why New Zealand shouldn't be afraid of the brain drain. There's been a lot of stories, sort of anguished hand-wringing about, are we going to lose all our best and brightest? And I think he unpicks that quite well in terms of, A, the reasons why people might want to stay here, and B, why, if there is a problem, that's something for us to deal with by making New Zealand better, not by making other places worse. So I think that was well worth a read.
I reckon that brain drain story is always tedious. Just keeps coming around with the same nothing response. And yes, it happens. The cycle goes on.
Yeah.
Jo.
Well, I'm probably going to get a lot of flack for this, and I'll just do a disclaimer first because I'm recommending a story from my partner. But I highly recommend that everyone take a look at TVNZ's Sunday program that's just been The Golden Years. Connor Whitten has done a pretty extraordinary look at the elderly and how they are living in poverty with the cost of living crisis. And I just think it's fascinating because we talk a lot about child poverty in New Zealand and we don't necessarily reflect very often on the elderly living in poverty, and superannuation obviously is getting tougher, and people having not been able to save. And definitely get a box of tissues before you watch it. I cried a lot and I'm not generally a crier. So there you go.
Well, tell Connor there's an open invitation for him to come on as a guest on here and take us through each of his stories each week.
That's a terrible idea. Let's not do that.
And that's it from Raw Politics for this week. Just one deviation to say that I have received in the mail from the publisher, Sam Sachdeva's wonderful book, The China Tightrope. I intend to recommend it each week as one of my recommendations, one chapter a week until it is launched on May 30th. Sam, what a fantastic achievement. Really looking forward to reading it this weekend. And I'm not sure I'll review it. I'm not sure we're up for that kind of intra
conflict
office
of interest
review.
there. Yeah, we need to, again, have some sort of disclosure or put it in Newsroom's cabinet manual.
Yeah, I think we'll have to get someone external and they can come on and review it, maybe online on the show.
Love it.
Thanks, everybody. Please send any questions you've got to Jo on Jo Moir at newsroom.co.nz. Thanks, Sam, Jo, and thanks to Hugo, our producer. You can find us here again next week. We'll be back where you get your podcasts or on YouTube, same time, and hopefully with the same smooth operation as gone for us this week in this podcast. Thanks all.